Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a really fascinating moment, the presidency of John Tyler.
Yeah, it's one of those periods that often gets overlooked, but it's actually pivotal. We've pulled together quite a bit historical accounts, Miller Center perspectives, Wikipedia to really get a full picture.
And it starts with something completely unprecedented, right? President William Henry Harrison dies just 31 days in.
Exactly, 31 days. And suddenly, Vice President John Tyler is president. No one had really grappled with this before. There was genuine constitutional fuzziness around it.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Tyler doesn't hesitate. He steps right in, claims the full powers of the presidency.
He does, and immediately gets flack for it. People called him his accidency.
Right, like he didn't earn it. Some even threw around the word usurpation.
But here's the thing, and it's crucial, his standing firm actually set this incredibly important precedent.
You mean for later successions? Like Taylor, Lincoln, FDR, their vice president stepping up?
Precisely. Because Tyler insisted he was the president with all the authority, it paved the way. It ensured stability later on.
So while they criticized him then, it turned out to be foundational for, well, how we handle presidential succession now.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to explore what actually happened during his term. The big domestic fights, the policy clashes.
How it all affected American politics and, what really lasted from his time in office. We want to give you the deep understanding, those surprising facts, without getting totally bogged down.
Let's dive in. Those early days must have been tense.
Yeah, so one of the first maybe surprising moves was Tyler keeping Harrison's whole cabinet.
Which sounds cooperative, but wasn't really. These cabinet members were mostly loyal to Henry Clay, a major Whig leader.
And they kind of expected Tyler to just go along with him, like Harrison was maybe supposed to, let the cabinet majority decide things.
That seems to have been the expectation. But Tyler had very different ideas about presidential authority. He basically said, I, as president, shall be responsible for my administration.
Meaning, the buck stops here.
Exactly. And he made it clear he'd accept resignations if they couldn't support his direction. That put him on a direct collision course with Clay.
And the collision happened pretty quickly, didn't it, over the national bank?
Oh, yeah, the big one. The Whigs were absolutely set on bringing back a national bank. Andrew Jackson had killed the previous one, and this was core Whig policy.
But Tyler wasn't on board. Why?
States' rights. He had these deep-seated constitutional objections, believe a national bank infringed on the powers of individual states. It was a huge philosophical divide back then.
So he vetoed the bank bill, even with his cabinet pushing for it.
He vetoed it twice. 2 separate bills, despite intense pressure from Clay and most of his own cabinet.
And that's when the cabinet walked out.
Almost all of them. After the second veto, they resigned en masse. Only Daniel Webster, the Secretary of State, stayed on for a bit.
Wow. So the Whigs, they must have been furious.
Furious is an understatement. They formally expelled him from the Whig Party, publicly kicked him out.
So he's a president without a party.
Completely isolated. They even demanded he resign, arguing the Senate president pro tem should take over. One source puts it perfectly. Tyler stood alone.
It's kind of amazing, then, that he managed to exert so much influence. A president with no party, no real popular mandate.
Yet he really leaned into presidential power, didn't he? Especially the veto. It's quite the paradox.
How so?
Well, he effectively stalled the entire agenda of the congressional majority. One source calls it using Jacksonian types of exclusive powers, which is interesting given his opposition to Jackson on other things.
So not just the bank vetoes.
No, he also vetoed 2 tariff bills. He eventually signed one he found more acceptable, but he blocked the high tariffs the Whigs wanted.
So bank, tariffs, what else? Wasn't there something about land sales?
Right. The Whig plan to distribute money from federal land sales back to the states. He blocked that too. Basically, the core Whig economic program hit a wall.
And this was all through the veto. A president without much support, just stopping Congress in its tracks.
Pretty much. It shows the inherent power of the veto, even when the president is politically weak. It was a major clash over the balance of power, executive versus legislative.
Did Congress try to fight back?
I
feel like I read something about trying to change the veto rules.
They did. Henry Clay pushed for a constitutional amendment so a simple majority in Congress could override a veto instead of 2/3.
Did that go anywhere?
No, it failed. There were also attempts, or at least serious talk, about impeachment. But those fizzled out too.
So Tyler, isolated and unpopular, still managed to fundamentally shape policy outcomes just by saying no.
It's a striking example of presidential power, even negative power, in action.
Now, amidst all this political warfare, Tyler was also going through some really difficult personal times.
Yes, that's important to remember. His first wife, Letitia, had been ill for a long time, and she actually passed away in the White House in September 1842.
That must have been incredibly hard, dealing with that loss while under such intense political pressure.
Absolutely. It adds a layer of human complexity to the political story. And then what followed was, well, it caused quite a stir.
His remarriage
Yeah.
to Julia Gardner.
Yes, it was relatively quick, and the age difference was significant.
30 years, right. She was younger than some of his own children.
Exactly. It became a huge topic of society gossip and public fascination. The sources mention some unusual circumstances around how they met too, though we don't have all the specifics here.
What does that focus on his personal life, the age gap, the speed of remarriage? Tell us. Maybe about him or just the times.
It certainly shows how the personal lives of presidents were becoming subjects of public interest, perhaps more than before. And maybe it hints at Tyler's own determination or perhaps impulsiveness, even in his personal affairs.
Okay, let's shift gears to probably the defining issue of his presidency, Texas.
Ah, yes. The annexation of Texas. This was a huge ambition for Tyler.
Why? Was it purely about expansion, or was there a political angle?
Both, really. He definitely saw it as a way to potentially build support for himself, maybe even create a new political party, some sort of Democratic-Republican revival centered around states' rights and expansion. He desperately needed a political win after the break with the Whigs.
But annexing Texas was incredibly controversial.
Hugely controversial. For starters, Mexico still considered Texas a rebellious province and warned annexation meant war.
And then there was the slavery issue. Adding Texas would mean adding another large slave state.
Exactly. It threatened to completely upend the delicate balance between free and slave states in Congress, which was already incredibly tense.
So how did Tyler navigate this? I remember reading his choice for Secretary of State was problematic.
John C. Calhoun. Appointing him in 1844 was, as one source calls it, a serious tactical error.
Why Calhoun specifically?
Calhoun was maybe the most prominent and uncompromising defender of slavery in the country. While he strongly supported annexation, putting him in charge of the negotiations basically screamed pro-slavery expansion to opponents in the North, making a difficult situation even harder. It alienated abolitionists and many Northern Whigs.
And the first attempt at annexation through a treaty failed in the Senate.
It did. Failed badly. Concerns about war with Mexico and especially the expansion of slavery were major factors. Martin Van Buren, a key political figure, also helped organize opposition against it.
So, treaty route blocked. What did Tyler do then? He didn't just give up.
No, he pivoted. Showed some real political savvy here, actually. He realized a treaty needed a 2/3 vote in the Senate, which is probably impossible. So he went for a joint resolution instead. This only needed a simple majority in both the House and the Senate, a much lower hurdle.
Clever, and that worked.
It did. It was still close, still contentious, but the joint resolution passed Congress near the very end of his term.
And he signed it.
On March 1st, 1845, literally his last full day in office, he signed the bill offering statehood to Texas. A huge last-minute achievement for him.
Talk about going out with a bang. But there was one final kind of ironic twist on that last day, too, wasn't there?
Yes, almost like a final congressional poke in the eye. On that very same last day, March 3rd, Congress actually overrode one of Tyler's vetoes on a minor appropriations bill for ships, I think.
Was that significant?
Historically, yes. It was the first time ever in U.S. history that Congress had overridden a presidential veto, a rather pointed end to a presidency defined by vetoes and conflict with Congress.
So, summing up that conflict, but stepping back, the big legacy seems to be that initial move, asserting the full power after Harrison's death.
Without a doubt. That precedent for the VP becoming the president, fully and completely, is arguably his most lasting impact. It ensured continuity, orderly transfers of power, eventually leading to the 25th Amendment, which formally codified it.
It's interesting that we focus so much on the domestic struggles, but sources mention he actually had more success in foreign policy.
That's generally true. While he fought constantly with Congress at home, his administration did manage some significant foreign policy achievements.
Like what?
Well, there's the Webster-Ashburton Treaty with Great Britain. That settled some long-standing border disputes up near Maine and Canada. Very important.
Okay, what else?
The Treaty of Wangea with China. This opened up more ports for American trade and established formal diplomatic relations, a big step in the Pacific.
And wasn't there something about Hawaii?
Yes, the Tyler Doctrine. He basically extended the Monroe Doctrine to Hawaii, warning other powers, particularly European ones, to keep out. It signaled growing American interest in the Pacific. So, yeah, a more positive record internationally.
So when historians look back at Tyler today, what's the verdict? It sounds like it's still pretty mixed.
Very mixed, you're right. He often ranks quite low in those presidential rankings, polls historians do. Some books even start by saying, okay, this guy's usually ranked near the bottom, but
But there are other perspectives.
definitely. Some praise his foreign policy achievements. Almost everyone acknowledges the crucial succession precedent, and some historians argue his firm stands, like on the bank vetoes, even if unpopular, were based on genuine constitutional principle and showed courage.
I even saw one ranking, I think from a more libertarian angle, that called him the best president ever, which is quite a take.
It is. It really highlights the range of opinions. But I think most historians would agree, regardless of their overall assessment, that his handling of the presidential succession in 1841 was his single most significant positive contribution.
So wrapping this all up, Tyler's presidency, born from this unexpected event, filled with conflict, isolation, even personal tragedy. It really tells us a lot, doesn't it? About presidential power, about governing when the country is deeply divided.
About how American identity itself was shifting and evolving, it really makes you think, doesn't it? For you listening, how does Tyler's experience facing down intense opposition, working in sort of constitutional gray areas, making a lasting impact despite being unpopular, how does that resonate with political challenges today?
Definitely something to chew on. Because whether you rate him high or low, his actions undeniably shaped the presidency, the country's borders, and that fundamental process of transferring power. It's a really complex piece of American history and definitely worth digging into more if you're interested.